A second United States dust bowl would hit world food stocks. So this is a report on climatenewsnetwork.net by Tim Radford, which was published on March 27th. So what is a dust bowl? A dust bowl is when a huge drought hits in an entire country and it really adversely affects the food production, the food crops of that country. And due to the drought, the soil loses its fertility, and huge dust storms ravage the entire landscape. And as you can see in this picture, this the picture of a small boy standing, and behind him is a wind of dust blowing. This is a real picture of a farmer's son in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl era. So, according to, as you can see, here are some images of the United States Dust Bowl, which happened in 1930s, and in that era, a lot of people died due to starvation and famine. And as you can see in this picture, huge dust storms are ravaging the entire communities. These are horrifying pictures, and as you can see here, even there's a vehicle being buried into the dust. So let's see what exactly is a dust bowl. The Dust Bowl was a period of severe dust storms that greatly damaged the ecology and agriculture of the American and Canadian prairies during the 1930s. Severe drought and a failure to apply dryland farming methods to prevent the aeolian process caused the phenomenon. So it was the name given to the drought-stricken southern plains region of the United States, which suffered severe dust storms. And it might hit again. And this is what the scientists are predicting. So let me just read along. When the United States Great Plains are hit again by the sustained drought, the world's food stock will feel the heat. The next time the fertile soils of North America turn to dust, the consequences will hit the United States food stocks, not just United States but worldwide, within 4 years of a climate crisis of the kind that fired John Steinbeck's 1939 masterpiece, The Grapes of Wrath. The United States would have consumed almost all its grain reserves, and the ripple effects would be felt in all those countries to which America normally exports grain. This is because America feeds much of the world. In a good year, the United States exports wheat with an energy value of more than 90 trillion kilocalories. The collapse of farmland into wasteland on the scale that inspired John Steinbeck could reduce this over a 4 year period to around 50 trillion kilocalories. So from 90 trillion kilocalories of energy value of wheat export will be reduced to 50 trillion kilocalories of energy value of wheat exports. Worldwide, global wheat reserves would fall by 31% in the first year, and 4 years on, somewhere between 36 and 52 countries would have consumed three-fourths of their own reserves. Food prices would rise around the planet. I quote here, in today's system of global food trade, disruptions are not bound by borders. Shocks to production are expected to affect trade partners who depend on imports for their domestic food supply, quoted by Alison Helsen, a climate scientist in Columbia University. So this just, in other words, what scientists are saying, that we live in a truly global society, global world, and in this period, especially of this pandemic being caused by coronavirus, a lot of people are blaming globalism, and they are suggesting that somehow globalism is bad, and somehow it is even possible in today's society to live in a world which is not which is away from, far removed from the ideas of globalism. And they suggest that we should not depend on other countries, and we should be protective, and we should have the factories in our own countries. And I can understand that you should certainly not import critical items like medical equipments, defense, etc. But is it even possible to not have globalism, to live without globalism? I don't think it is. Some countries cannot produce wheat, some countries cannot produce certain critical items, and which have to be imported. I'm sure United States needs to import a lot of things which it cannot produce. A lot of, even in the service sector, a lot of critical essential work uh, being done, blue collar work is being done by the immigrants like the Mexicans, or the work in the IT sector. A lot of engineers are being imported from other countries, and it is just naive to suggest that if we just live isolate the country from the world, we will be able to live and sustain a massive population as such the US is having right now. I quote here: accessing food reserves can, for a time, buffer populations from trade-induced supply shortages. But as reserves deplete, people are at risk of food shortages. Our results remind us that mitigating climate risks require accounting not only for the direct effects of climate change, like local extreme weather events, but also the climate impacts which travel through our interconnected system of global trade. By some time in the mid-century, most of the US will be between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer. Researchers have already warned that the border between the arid western states and the more fertile midwestern plains has shifted to the east. There have been repeated warnings that as global average temperatures rise in response to even uh, greater use of fossil fuels, the US will become increasingly vulnerable to climate extremes, including mega droughts. Drought is already becoming the new normal for Californians, and the fertility of the Great Plains is in any case vulnerable to human changes to a natural landscape. So California and United States produce a lot of food supply for the entire country, and a lot of people don't know that is that California is actually a major food producer of for the United States, and even for a lot of other countries to which the United States exports food. And due to the scientists, the soil is losing its fertility due to severe drought, and due to that it's even the crops are not growing, and even if the crops grow, they will have less nutrition value. A succession of droughts of the kind that turns the farmlands of Kansas and Oklahoma into a devastated landscape and turned thousands of Americans into climate refugees would not necessarily now mean the onset of a regional famine. Alright, so the Dr. Helson and her colleagues report in the journal Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems that they contemplated the likelihood of a 4-year drought of the kind that created the notorious 1930s Dust Bowl, and then examined the possible impact on world trade systems. Yields and nutrition will be affected. Just as such climate events could hit hard those nations that rely on food imports, but even the other great grain producing countries. So the other countries which produce a lot of grain like China, India, Iran, Canada, Russia, Morocco, Australia, and Egypt would also see their reserves fall because of the loss of yield and nutrition value. The climate crisis is, in any case, a threat to the world's supper tables. There has been repeated evidence that food output will inevitably be at risk in a warming world. With higher temperatures, yield will be reduced, and with higher atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide that warm the planet, nutrition levels of many staples are expected to fall. So, due to the increased carbon dioxide, the nutrition levels of a lot of crops will be falling, and which is not a good news because that means that the amount of food that we eat will give us less nutrition as compared to right now, and this might increase a lot of other issues like health issues, malnutrition, and secondary health issues due to malnutrition and such. The researchers factored in none of these things. They supposed that a climate catastrophe that paralleled the Dust Bowl era would occur only in the US, and found that despite strain, the world's market could probably cope. But other studies have repeatedly found that the potential for climate catastrophe and massive crop failure to strike in more than one region at any one time are increasing, with ominous consequences for world food security. I quote, in the context of food security, we show that accessing food reserves can, for a time, buffer populations from trade inducing supply shortages. But as reserves deplete, people are at risk of food shortages. So this is the crisis which could be happening in the near future, and if at the what can what can even what can even make things worse for us is that a when this crisis is happening, another pandemic like another viral pandemic could hit the world, and which can magnify the disastrous effects of of this famine, of this dust bowl, and which means that we have to be really careful. We have to focus on advanced medical research to combat these kind of pandemics like virus and bacterias, and every year we are seeing new bacterias emerging due to mutations. They are mostly coming from bushmeat like SARS, COVID, etc. So we have to take steps like, for example, we can ban bushmeat globally, which would certainly help us in reducing the emergence of these deadly viruses around the world.